Thank you, Mr. Chair, and thank you. I still want to call you Chief, Chief Ross, who's become a good friend over the years, being a fellow British Columbian. And I'm so glad you brought up reconciliation. This is what we're talking about today in this committee, but in the way that you did, because you talked about examples of how to do it, but how, and also how not to do it. I'll quote an article from of yours in the past, just a couple years ago. Foreign influence is nothing new. But what we are seeing today is a well-executed campaign financed by the likes of Tides Canada and the U.S.-based Rockefeller Foundation. Caught in the middle are First Nations, such as the Wet'suwet'en, whose people are being divided. The other group that's caught in the middle are everyday British Columbians, including fellow Aboriginals who just want to get home, to work, or to the hospital. How does the government support for radical Angos and their agendas help in reconciliation?
It doesn't. And when I got into council, elected as a councillor in 2003 and 2004, my chief councillor had experiences with these types of organizations. And so we spent a lot of time trying to understand the relationship between Angos of this nature and the relationship with the governments of BC and Canada and their agenda, which was all across BC and Canada. It was something we just figured out pretty quick, that the agenda had nothing to do with First Nations interests.
Right.
It had their own agenda that was specific to each organization. And so that partnership or relationship was actually severed between my band and those types of organizations because we were trying to resolve poverty, right, suicides, children going into government care. And so when we finally decided not to welcome into our territory, especially during the LNG development days, that was when we took a look at BC and Canada and started to see this was happening all across Canada. And we could see other First Nations falling victim to this.
Right. Yeah, and I'm glad you even referred to that because I remember those days. And I guess the question, I'll just say even the definition, we all want reconciliation, I believe. I really do believe that. I think most Canadians do. Oxford calls it reconciliation the restoration of friendly relations. Isn't that something that we all would appreciate, Absolutely. But I've been touring around Northern Canada as a Northern Affairs Minister, and I've spoken with many Indigenous people, Inuit and Nunavut, Wet'suwet'en in Northern BC, and really all across, again, the North. And 80 to 85% of all peoples are supportive of natural resource development, and as a key part of reconciliation, because it's prosperity for peoples. It means everybody's doing well, and we all can do better. And you spoke to it a little bit in the community of the Haisla. I want you to expand a little bit on, again, if this government would decide to really pursue reconciliation where it really makes change on the ground, really helps people in communities like the Haisla. Explain a little bit, again, extrapolate on how good it can be if they were to truly pursue it.
Well, it's not just First Nations success that we're talking about here as well. That matters. I mean, come to my community and see the single mom at soft welfare or my friend that stayed out of prison. But when you talk about resource development at the First Nation stage, you got to remember the revenues and the benefits don't all go to the First Nation. Mm-hmm. The government gets benefits. And then the government turns around and uses that money for highways, hospitals, schools, even our paychecks as politicians. Everybody benefits from that, non-First Nations and First Nations alike. So the reconciliation we're talking about, I think, should be characterized as a political and a legal relationship that has to be mended, because right now First Nations participate in every part of society that I just mentioned. We love the hospitals, we love our cell phones, we love the highways. It's this political obstruction that we have at the courts that were settled out for the last 10 years that we're now having to go back and revisit. But at the end of the day, true reconciliation at the economic level does benefit everybody. And you're seeing it in action right when we're talking about, our daily lives. Everything that we take for granted is actually what First Nations want. They want to get a mortgage, which is happening right now today. They want to go to the hospital. They want a doctor. They want a nurse. They want a new cell phone. It's this political definition of reconciliation that's holding us back.
How much time do I have, Chair? You're on mute.
You have 1 minute and 20 seconds.
Okay, thank you. You've made this long trip out to BC, and we've talked about how long it is to get out here. So we really appreciate you being here. I guess in my shortage, last 60 seconds, here's the opportunity. If you were to say, with those 60 seconds, and give the government some advice, what would you ask them to do? They're pursuing the legislation, and that's why you're here today. What would be one key thing you want to leave with them?
I'll tell you what I've been saying in BC for the last 5 years. Do not use reconciliation as a tool to divide Canadians. That is not what Aboriginals want. You'll see it. You've seen it when churches were being burned down all across Canada just recently. There were a number of First Nations, including myself, who went out there and said, do not burn down churches. Do not provoke civil disobedience over this. There's a better way to do it, including Aboriginals that went to residential school. Mm-hmm. There's a small number of people that want to see divisiveness in our country. And it took me a while to realize that actually I'm proud to be from British Columbia, and I'm proud to be Canadian, because I've looked at all across the world at places that don't have it as good as us. We got to remember that. It is a good country, but we can't let politics divide us. So please don't let the word reconciliation further divide the conversation that should be happening, not only here, but all across Canada.
Thank you, Chief.